I want to talk about mastitis because this in particular is one of the things that I find is so badly understood and so badly managed that it becomes a nightmare for a lot of women, and quite unnecessarily. In fact, I've seen over the years so many women who ended up really ill with breast infections and needed hospitalisation and intravenous antibiotics, that I felt actually if they had known and understood how to deal with it all in the first place, that would never have happened. So it's very important that we understand a few quite basic things. First of all, mastitis, the very word with ITIS on the end of it, means inflammation of, in this case, the breast. So anything that has ITIS on the end involves an immune response. And part of that is going to be heating. That's how our immune response works. Now, if a woman has mastitis, that does not automatically mean that she has a breast infection. The two terms actually can be two different issues. So mastitis generally just means a sore breast. It may have a red patch on it, and the woman may feel as if she's going down with the flu. So those are the pretty common symptoms. Occasionally she may have a headache, possibly even for 24 hours or so, before she actually starts to become aware that she's got a sore breast and these flu symptoms. She may or may not have any lumpy areas in the breast that are block ducts. So these things are a bit more common within the early weeks and months of breastfeeding, because we're all chronically oversupplied in those months, and we do not necessarily, between ourselves and our babies, have situations where we're getting well-drained breasts most of the time. And if you add the stresses of daily living to all of that, then that can be the reason why we end up with symptoms. But that's just it, they are symptoms, and if you manage the symptoms really well, then you may not need to go and see a doctor. Because going and seeing a doctor will usually involve a prescription for antibiotics, and actually only 20% of women with mastitis symptoms have been shown to have an infection. So therefore, what's really important is just making sure that you look after the symptoms and that you don't allow them to progress. So with the baby, with little babies, what you really want to see is that the baby is not being fed in these sort of positions, because what that means is that the baby is not very well attached and may not be draining the breast very well. And those sort of things can contribute very easily to a breast which is not as well drained as it should be. So this is really more like what I want to see when mothers are feeding little babies, so that the baby is brought in really closely against the mother's body like this, and with all of the baby's body facing the mother and very firmly pressed in. Babies love that. They were used to being firmly pressed in their mother's body before they were born. So that's one thing that's very important, and that also tends to prevent problems with sore nipples. Because if you've got sore nipples, you are not going to be so inclined to leave the baby there to finish the feed properly. Okay, the next point is, I find that probably the first piece of really poor information that is given to women who've got mastitis symptoms is to put heat on it. And so what's happening is that women go and get their heat packs out and heat them up, and they put them on this sore breast. Now, what I'd like to challenge you with here is, which other inflamed part of your body would you actually be advised to put heat on? And the answer to that is, that's just not the most sensible advice. If you have got an inflamed sore knee and you put a heat pack on it like that, what you can expect is that it will end up 3 or 4 times worse than what it is to start off with. And that's exactly the same situation that happens with mastitis. So what used to be prevalent advice was just to put warmth briefly on a sore breast before feeding or expressing. And unfortunately, because we have this belief in Western countries that if a little is good, then buckets more painted on, must be that much better. And so we've progressed from just warmth briefly to lots of heat frequently and for long periods of time. And as a result of that, we've had so many women then who have ended up with mastitis progressing like a runaway express train, and they can end up very sick. So please do not ever put heat on a sore breast. The only time you put heat on a breast is if you want to increase your milk production, and that is not what you want to be doing if you have mastitis. The next thing is that the research has also shown that it's very useful with an inflammatory condition like mastitis to take anti-inflammatories. So if you tolerate them, drugs like aspirin, that's okay, but actually the other anti-inflammatory drugs on the market, such as ibuprofen, Voltaren, those kind of drugs are actually more inflammatory in action than aspirin is. And because some women may be in quite a lot of pain when they have mastitis, they can also take paracetamol, and that doesn't fight with the other anti-inflammatories. So what some women are doing is alternating a dose of it a couple of hours interspersed with the others, but taking them according to directions. That's quite important. The next thing that I find is also tremendously useful to women who've got mastitis, because by this stage the breast may be quite painful and they may not really want to do anything with it, including feed a baby. And so what I teach them to do is use vibration on that sore breast. So this can be done through clothing, it certainly doesn't have to be done on bare skin. And women's response to this when I turn this on and give it to them is usually something like looking at it very cautiously and then putting it here like this, and then suddenly realising that they're not in pain, and their shoulders drop and they heave a sigh of relief. And they sometimes say, we're buying one of these on the way home. It's not that you actually need to rush out and buy something purpose-built like this. In fact, most households these days have something that vibrates, and so it may be things like an electric toothbrush or an electric shaver with the cover on. It may be a kitchen mixer unit, minus the beaters, I hasten to say. Some women have used things like power tools, so probably one of the favourites has been an orbital sander. Now, having said that, you need to be very careful that anything with moving parts, the moving parts are nowhere near you, so that then you are making use of the vibration of the equipment, but you're not actually getting damaged by any of the moving parts. Very important. So at least 10 minutes every hour of vibration applied to a sore breast. Lots of good breast drainage with the baby feeding by preference, but if the baby is not feeding, then expressing to keep the breast well drained. There is no such thing as an empty breast. You just want a breast which feels fairly comfortable and isn't overly hard and full. That's been the cause of the trouble in the first place. The feedback mechanisms of the breast as it gets overly full are inflammatory, and that's all that you're dealing with. So that's why it is so important to deal with the inflammatory symptoms to start with, so that they do not get bigger and better. So then mastitis becomes something that women feel confident about dealing with and not feeling it. It's an object of terror, and it's something that then they have to, every time that they get the symptoms, rush off to their doctors, because in fact most of the time that will be not necessary. So it's about developing confidence in your own ability to deal with this, so that then you are in charge of the situation. At the moment you can buy copies in digital form of my book Breastfeeding Works, Even with Allergies, from my website, which is breastfeedingworks.com.au. So Breastfeeding Works, all lowercase. And you will also find hard copies available on the net from Amazon and a few other different sites on the net. But if you want to ask me directly, then my website has got the means for you to email me, and there's other contact details on my